Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Donnelly, Manager of Webinars for IBM Systems Magazine. And on behalf of IBM Systems Magazine, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You may ask a question at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. You may download a PDF version of the slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources. You'll find that on the left side of your screen, and know that you can download the deck right from the platform without being disconnected from the webinar. Today's webinar, How to Navigate the HADR Landscape for IBM I, is sponsored by Health Systems. Our featured speakers today are Ash Giddings and Tom Huntington from Health Systems, and Matt Stadler from IT Solutions Group. Ash is a pre-sales specialist at Health Systems. He began his career on IBM mainframe before moving on to mid-range systems such as IBM I and AIX, and then Windows and Linux. He's worked for some of the largest data centers in Europe and has advised large companies around the world on ways to save costs and improve efficiencies. Tom is the Executive Vice President of Technical Solutions at Health Systems and has been named an IBM champion for the last 3 years. He oversees business alliances and large customer relationships and ensures that Health Systems software works with other major software and hardware vendors worldwide. We're also pleased to have Matt Stadler with us today. Matt is President of IT Solutions Group. Matt began his career as an IBM AS400 Services Support Representative, working on AS400, iSeries, and Power Systems. In 2000, he founded IT Solutions Group, an IBM business partner specializing in IBM I hardware services. Matt is also a common subject matter expert on HA for IBM I. So, with our introductions complete, Ash, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janine, for that introduction. So, we'd like to start today by showing you a graph. And this is a graph from the 2019 Health Systems Marketplace Survey that I'm sure many of you have contributed to or have read. It's where we ask people around the globe to talk about their environment, their IBM I environment, their infrastructure, their applications, and of course, their personnel. Now, this graph shows that while security was a top concern for 69% of respondents, more than half the contributors are concerned about high availability or disaster recovery. During today's webinar, we're going to be touching to some of the reasons why people maybe have these concerns. Okay, so the health and the stability of the IBM I platform is clear when considering 71% of respondents rely on it to run more than half of their core business. Frightening. The issue for organizations tends to be modernizing the user interface to these critical applications so that as business unit users retire and a new workforce appears, they're not shocked by this green screen interface, this perceived old school interface. So currently about a third of the market is still 100% green screen. For many, the use of IBM I has changed over the years, and it's often viewed as probably the most robust and stable system in the data center. It's used as a database server with many platforms and applications integrating with it. Now, before we get started today, we'd like to run today's first poll question. So, we're interested in hearing about what high availability solution you're running today. So, maybe you're running a logical replication solution. Maybe you've got PowerHA. Maybe it's live partition mobility. And some of these, we're going to talk about these as we go through the session today. Maybe it's VM Recovery Manager for HA. Maybe it's Flash Copy. Is Flash Copy a high availability solution? We're going to delve into that as we go through today. or maybe you have something else that we haven't thought of today that you're running to manage your infrastructure, or maybe you have no high availability solution at all. So I know once upon a time there were it was just the large financial institutions and banks that had a high availability solution, and of course logical replication can probably be considered the grandfather of high availability, having had a presence in the market for more than 25 years. So let's have a little look at the results here as they come through.
Okay, Ash, I'm going to give it one more tick here and see if we can get a few more responses. Okay, that should do it. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and send these results to the audience.
That's great.
Okay,
Thank you. So what do we see here? We see that PowerHA and flash copy, and closely followed by logical replication. So that's interesting, actually. I hadn't expected flash copy to be quite as high up. I expected logical replication to be flying away with it. And it's probably been updated now, and we do have logical replication and PowerHA probably the most popular. Tom, any thoughts, observations on that?
Yes, I would say that it points out that people are using combinations of these technologies in their data center, and that's really not all that unusual. That somebody might be doing a point-in-time flash copy, but also doing PowerHA or logical replication. Matter of fact, that should be the case.
Got you. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I guess if we'd have done the same survey maybe 10 years ago, logical replication would have been miles ahead. So it's interesting to see the change in market. Fantastic. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, here's the agenda. We'll start briefly by clarifying what HA or high availability is, and then spend some time talking about whether high availability and disaster recovery are one and the same. These terms are often used, I find, interchangeably by many in the industry. So we're just going to pull that apart a little bit. Next, we'll discuss what methods there are for achieving HA and IBMI. And as you'll see, there are probably more methods than you imagine. We'll finish off by trying to help you decide which solution is the best, or the best solution for you, and how you can go about making that decision. And then finally, as Janine said, we'll open the floor to questions. So if you have any, please fire away and we'll answer as many as we can. So what is high availability? Tom, can you kick us off and talk about what high availability is to you?
Absolutely. That is the age-old question. What does HA mean to you as a customer? And some people are really talking more DR than they are HA. But reality is on IBMI, we have customers or see customers with low swap times of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Certainly less than an hour is where people should be able to get their business switched over from one server to another. And with 7.4, IBM's got some new announcements that with the Db2 Mirror, we'll talk about that today. And with all this technology today, we'll talk about, the pros, and you'll have to kind of read between the lines. There are also cons on some of these different options. So high availability doesn't always mean exactly the same thing to everybody, but what we're really trying to do is be able to sustain our data center as operationally 100% as much as possible, and without having a failure. Because as Ash talked about earlier, we have a lot of core business that runs on this server, and we need it. And our server used to be able to be a 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 type business, but no longer. So high availability is often also measured in the desired uptime that we want. And as the world has changed over the last decade or so, it's kind of around the level of 99.99% of desired uptime. And what that amounts to is less than 5 minutes of downtime a year. Now, fortunately for us on the IBMI Power technology, the server itself is very much so up and running all the time. And I always say with that, let's knock on wood a little bit, right? So uptime is something that's kind of expected with the server. With high availability, though, what you're doing is setting yourself up so that if there is a disaster in the data center, a power outage, you never know what it might be, a hurricane coming, that you can do your swap over to your other data center. Now, we also have to think about the hourly cost of downtime, and 81% of the firms that surveyed said that the number topped over $300,000, and this is from the ITIC survey. They do this periodically. You go back over the last decade and see numbers of what they've seen from a cost of downtime to what organizations expect for uptime with this. So as we look at high availability, with companies that are over 1,000 employees, they say that number is around 100,000 of what an hour would cost. And when you think about that, you start thinking about productivity, and you're multiplying out, if you have 1,000 employees times whatever their salary is, and lost productivity, and then also maybe lost opportunity costs depending upon what industry you're in. If you're in healthcare, hospitals, casinos, we got some really expensive organizations where an hour of downtime is real money to them. So, Matt, what are your thoughts on this particular one?
Well, I agree. I want to add one more to it as well, is having high availability is a difference between having a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. We've done probably a half a dozen HA installs because the small business wanted to do business with larger companies. I recently had a bank that lost $1 billion company, $1 billion client, because they didn't have high availability. So there's something else when you look at high availability, is to have it on your resume, if you will, when you're going out soliciting new business.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So it's another way
Matt,
of
I know you. Matt, you talk also about business continuity or continuance insurance. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this is an interesting point that most people don't know about. When you have a business continuance, everybody has this, by the way, on their insurance premiums, and basically it's the insurance policy to mitigate loss. When you prove to your insurance company that you actually have high availability and you can show them that you're updating your data and your data is current, that you will get a reduction in your insurance premiums. Our largest customer gets a $60,000 a year savings because they prove to their insurance company that they're getting high availability and they're updating their data real time. Some of the things that happen as we go through the slide is people don't have the funds to acquire high availability solutions. This right here is your silver bullet to get funding for that process. I have a point down here, though, as one president of a company, as I was battling him with HA Solutions, said, if my building is gone, my business is gone. And that's not true. I've been in many disasters, and we've always been able to rebuild, but we also had their data. Okay, so this is an insurance policy for your data as well, and you can get a reduction in your premiums by doing that. So I would encourage people to go to the business unit that handles the insurance on it and address this issue with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. That can be used to help justify or build a ROI around HA, because often we think of HA as more of an insurance policy, but here's really a case where it's impacting real dollars in the organization. And speaking of that, that might help that additional 50% of the marketplace that doesn't have HA and they're still relying on tape, virtual tape libraries. Maybe they're doing some cloud backups and they just don't have a solution. And to Matt's point, if you at least back up your data, we can always recover your system, even if you don't know how to. There's people like Matt and myself. Give us a call, we'll help you out. I mean, that's just really what it amounts to, is to help you be able to recover your system. So when you look at this slide, you have to also think about your recovery time objective. If you're okay with 24 hours of downtime, then recovering from tape or virtual tape library is realistic and okay. But if you're not and you want to be within that hour of or less, then high availability is where you want to be. That's really what you have to get to. So we think about roadblocks. I mean, I always look at technology and I try to think, okay, well, why aren't people doing this? And often the case, it's cost, as Matt brought up earlier. It's that having to have a second system, a second data center, and today we'll talk about some different options there. Then often it's also knowledge. We went through, there's 4 different technologies that were very popular in the first polling question, and so people have maybe never done flash copy or PowerHA or even logical replication, so they're scared about that, or they had a failed roll swap. And the other thing is they think the business doesn't really see the value, right? And yet when you start talking to people, even the smallest of shops today on IBM I depend on their system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Matt, what do you think about the fear topic with this?
Well, yeah, it's just that people are, first of all, you have to wear another hat now, right? I'm a system administrator. Now I have to wear another hat for high availability. And the nut of it, though, is HA management has become very simple. So to add it to a workload of an administrator, it's a very simple task these days. And the horror stories that you hear out there, they're just not the case. And I think a lot of this gets down to the consultants that are doing the work and the training. The education that they go through. I find all too often where some consultants will just go in and kind of slam in an HA implementation process and never go through the training process on it. So I think training is probably the most critical part of this whole process that would eliminate the fears and the complications.
Okay. So Matt, over to you on this one.
And so, on the last slide, you talked about cost. And some people, so what we did here is we actually looked at, this was a little PO5, a Power 9, and we ran it through some amperage in our data center. And we looked at what it cost for a customer to have a second system. So your power and cooling, believe it or not, it costs $9,000 a year just to power up a Power 9, a little PO5 4-core machine. And then your people power, if you had someone at 1 hour a day to manage tapes and do all these kind of functions on it, you're looking at about $11,000 to do annual OS upgrades and hardware maintenance and so on and so forth. You're adding in more dollars associated with that. If you have off-site backup, you got Iron Mountain. And then just your day-to-day management process is what I'm trying to show here is you typically will invest about $40,000 of your company's money into managing a second machine or a CVU, right, to do your high availability. If you look at the same cost, you can actually transfer that same cost and probably even save money compared to the matrix I'm showing here, and let an expert do it. Let someone like us, like a managed service provider that is skilled in this process, works with it day in and day out, and let them take care of the process for you as well. So you've got high availability, you got experts running the machine. Now I put a bullet in here called MSP performance ROI. The reason I put that in there because us as an MSP, we want the solution to run absolutely flawlessly, right? Because we don't want to make it a labor-intensive process. And so it is our goal to optimize the ability to fail over in that at any time because we want to simplify the labor-intensive process, right? So there's huge value by looking to go to an outsourced company and outsource your high availability solutions.
Yeah, we see a lot of customers nowadays being interested in HA as a service or DR as a service,
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. So I posed this question at the start. Are HA and DR the same? Well, I hear them used interchangeably, randomly, but there is a subtle difference between HA and DR. So DR, or disaster recovery, is really for getting data out of one data center into another. And the data center needs to be far enough apart so that it can't be impacted by the same disaster. The same disaster can't hit both data centers. That's how I view disaster recovery in layman's terms. Now, some HA solutions do have this DR type capability, while others are restricted by distance or bandwidth. Anything to add on that, Matt? Fairly straightforward, I guess.
No, it is absolutely straightforward. We use the term geographical disbursement, yes, on DR, but yes.
Got you. So, Matt, now sounds like a good time for you to introduce recovery point objectives, so that's RPO, and recovery time objectives, RTO. So, over to you to provide some detail here, along with some examples.
Okay, excellent. This is probably the most important slide on this entire deck. Understanding recovery point objective is crucial. And I think it's more crucial than recovery point objective is more crucial than the recovery time objective. And here's why. My recovery point objective is how much data am I willing to lose? And the next slide will show a little bit more of a visual on that. But if I'm doing my backups at midnight and I have a crash at noon, I've lost all those transactions. The key to that is, can I reproduce those transactions today? You know, years ago, we had all green screen technology. It was all data entry on it. And so we had the ability to recreate our transactions. Nowadays, we have transactions coming in from RF devices, maybe a forklift driver, you know, moving stuff around in a warehouse, unloading semis. We might have transactions coming in from the web. Those transactions are gone. There's just no way that we could actually reproduce those transactions, okay? So every disaster that I've been in, and I've been in a lot of them in my 19 years of doing this, people are always have this sigh of relief, even though their machine doesn't come up for an hour or two, that they've got their data on that second machine. Okay, we just had a failure a week ago where a customer lost their SAM, and the first thing they did was query their data on the target machine. And then it took us a couple hours to come up and run because of license keys and so on and so forth on it, but they had their data. And so I think RPO doesn't get the respect it deserves compared to RTO. So again, it's how much data are you willing to lose, because you can actually lose those transactions.
Got you.
And so here's that visual. You know, again, I do my backup, and it also says, by the way, if you notice, it says usable, right? You know, I'm vulnerable to, you know, a potential tape a problem with my tape when I go to load it and restore my data on it. And then I go through my day with all those transactions that I don't have control over, and then Murphy comes up and we have a disaster strikes, right? And then how long to the recovery point? So again, one of the things that we focus on, especially when we're talking to C-level people on it, is they need to understand how much data they're going to lose, and can they recover that data? And if not, what's the ramification to the business?
That's great, Matt. Fantastic.
Okay.
Let's
next.
I think we've given you enough background now. Let's start to look into some detail, some of the methods that are available in the marketplace for actually achieving high availability. So, I guess there's three main methods. Let's start at method one. Db2 for IBM, which offers active-active source and target, or just active source configurations. We've got, I guess, the grandfather of them all, logical replication. So this has been around for more than 25 years now in various forms, and it's typically software-based, usually by third-party vendors, and often, but not always, makes use of remote journaling technology, which is built into the operating system. And then, of course, thirdly, hardware-based replication using PowerHA or maybe LPM, live partition mobility. And with it, it's active-passive or active-inactive approach. And we're going to talk about these three methods in some detail now, along with maybe a couple of options that you maybe don't know about or haven't heard about before. So, method number one, Db2 Mirror for I. This was announced with a fanfare along with V7R4 in the summer, and in some quarters was described as game-changing, quite rightly. In essence, this solution is aimed at those environments where continuous availability is required, not just high availability, continuous. So when I think of this, I think about banks and other institutions where 5 minutes of downtime a year is totally unacceptable. So Db2 for IBM is two nodes in the same data center, typically, that allow your applications to read and write to two databases at the same time. This bit's key, at the same time. The same time capability is provided by the OS using clever database clustering technology, a new license program, IBM Db2 Mirror for I, or for those that like their acronyms, 5770-DBM, and also a high-speed RoCE cable, so RDMA over converged Ethernet. Other prereqs include Power 8 or later, and of course you need to be running 7.4. Now nodes can be at differing hardware generations, so you could mix a Power 8 and a Power 9 system, and you can, once the next version of the operating system is available, mix different OSs. So you'll be able to mix V7R4 with V7R5 or whatever IBM decide to call it. Now, by way of a neat web interface, you can move your workload from one node to another, maybe to perform some maintenance, such as a hardware upgrade or a PTF load, and then simply enable this node once the maintenance is complete. Users and the applications totally oblivious to it. It's invisible to them. They just see one system. Because of the limit of the RoCE cable, it's around a 200-meter limit, making it this is really a data-sensitive solution. So don't confuse it with disaster recovery. It isn't disaster recovery. It's the highest of the high availability. So just think continuous availability when you think Db2 Mirror for I. So what are the benefits? Well, lots of benefits here, starting with the fact that the functionality is provided by the operating system, always a good point. Well, an extension of this in the form of a licensed program that really gives you a couple of notches up from high availability. Matt talked a couple of minutes ago about RTO, recovery time objective. With Db2 Mirror, if one node is lost, any one node is lost, the other takes over immediately and seamlessly, with zero impact to the users or your applications. So RTO for Db2 Mirror for I is zero, really. So organizations using Db2 for Mirror will still, in theory, need a tool that can support replication over long distances or maybe into the cloud. I guess that's why traditional software replication or hardware replication is still valid and still applies for these active environments or instances. This is an area where logical replication solution or PowerHA, both of which you'll hear about these shortly, can help close those gaps. So Tom talked about earlier about knitting some of these solutions together, and that's a good example there. So I'm not privy to pricing, but I would imagine that at least for now, Db2 Mirror for I is aimed at maybe the top 5% of IBM I customers, and likely to make its way into the mainstream community, maybe over later iterations. Just my view, but that's where I can see it going. So Tom, do you want to talk to us about logical replication?
Sure will, Ash. Thank you. And that's a good point on Db2 Mirror. It is two active systems too, so you got two of everything. So you have to think a little bit about your cost too. So it is generally aimed at a larger end customer today. But there's a lot of interest. I'm out at IBM TechU, and the sessions have been pretty full on that topic. So here we're talking about software-based replication, or often referred to as logical replication. IBM I, and actually the System 38, has had journaling in it ever since the beginning of Db2 being out there, basically. And that's just basically a recording of your data changes on one system, often referred to the production system or the source system, that then goes to the local journal. And then built into the operating system, there is technology called remote journaling that came out probably about 2 decades ago. And the data goes into the remote journal to mirror the local journal. And then you typically have a product on the target system, like our Robot HA product, that would read the data hitting the remote journal and apply the data changes to the backup server. Now, the benefits to this, of course, is distance. You can have your servers quite a ways apart and around the world, actually, and many people do. The other aspect of this is not everything goes through the journal. I mean, that's something that's a little confusing out there. Other things like programs and or new objects that arrive that are physical files in a library, they have to first be able to be sent over to the target system. So most of the products use some form of FTP to send the object over from the production system to the backup system and restore them over there to get them in place. So there is some potential latency there. as Matt talked about, RPO that you have to think about. But if set up correctly in today's world, in nanoseconds, your data goes from the source to the target, and we're all good. I mean, that's the way it should work, and most customers do actually achieve that. Now, another aspect of any HA technology really is testing your role swaps. And with software or logical-based replication, there is a process that you're going to run through from the production system to the target system to do the role swap. And it's always a good idea to do this at least once a year. It's kind of like backups. If you don't ever test restoring from your backups, do you really have a good backup? You don't know. And the same is true with HA. You shouldn't be afraid of this. Now, most people, what they do is they put together some script, and that script helps them do the role swap. It's a CL, of course, that's shutting things down and starting things up on the target system. And then in talking with customers, most often they also use like a DNS name server as a way of switching the users from one system to another. There's also customers using what we call a test while active technology, and that is a good thing to do too. Most of the logical replication products out there have some form of, hey, I can leave the users on the system, on the production system without actually doing a role swap, and really what I'm doing is just verifying my data, verifying my application on the target system. So I've kind of talked about a bit about some of the different methods for achieving high availability, but some other things to think about that people don't always consider is that, you know, maybe I do have Db2 Mirror for I, or I have PowerHA, and yet I want to do BI on another partition because I want to take that query process, those SQL processes off my production system and put them on another partition somewhere. You can use logical replication for that, and often that's being done alongside PowerHA. It allows for system maintenance on the source, so that's another benefit of doing HA is that I can take down my production system, do some maintenance, and run my business over on the target. The software replication, logical replication, is highly configurable, meaning you can pick and choose what you want to replicate versus all or nothing kind of approach. And the products should have some kind of proactive self-healing so that if they notice something out of sync, they automatically pick up on that and fix the issue. The other thing that's very nice with logical replication is it does work with any size internal or external disk or combinations of things like going from internal disk to SAN if you want, or from a small system to a large system that's in a maybe hosted environment like Matt talked about with in the cloud, those kinds of things. So logical replication has been around for quite a long time, and certainly something that's very, very popular. So over to you, Matt, to talk about PowerHA.
Thank you, Tom. I want to add one more to your testing process you're talking about, and it's probably the number one failure for doing a test while active is license keys. You know, we often in logical replication, we don't omit the license keys on it. They get replicated. License keys are serial number dependent, and more often than not, when we do a failover, the application won't come up. They got to pick up the phone and call admin support for that application and get keys. So it's also make sure you test all your license keys as well. It's pretty important. So that is the number one factor for failovers.
Matt, that's a great point. And just so if anybody's using the Health Systems software, we actually have a pre-staged license key, so you can enter more than one license key into the source so that when the license keys are replicated, they're already over on the target. We've been doing that for, I don't know, I'm going to say at least 5 years.
Yeah, I remember Chuck coming to me a comment one time and said, oh, by the way, we're doing this. Well, I've been touting that all along because, you know, your product, when we go to fail over, we don't have issues with Health System products. But there are other products out there that, you know, they don't handle it the same way. So it's very important to check those license keys. So kudos to Health Systems for doing that duplicate keys. Okay, so now we're talking about IBM PowerHA, and PowerHA is actually system mirror is the telling word on that. And that's important because we've all used mirroring in our career at one point or another. And early on, you would mirror one drive to another. And the operating system did that for you. You trusted it. You didn't have to babysit it. You didn't have to monitor it. Well, PowerHA system mirror is basically a cluster of drives, 1, 2, 10, 20, whatever that number is. So it's basically mirroring on steroids, as I call it. and is replicating an independent auxiliary storage pool from one machine to the other. So that's why it requires very little bit of work to manage it once it's implemented. It's handled by the operating system. It's handled by the disk management function of the OS at a LIC level. The one key on this slide is block level replication. Well, block is 4K. So every time we update a block of data, we're sending 4K blocks to the target machine. With logical replication, we're sending bits and bytes of data. So we're sending very small amount of data, where PowerHA, we're sending a much larger box of data. So it's very important to get a bandwidth analysis done before you ever look at PowerHA. And we're also seeing quite a bit in the market share where some people are using compression tools within PowerHA. We're not a big fan of that here. We want to have our native IP, our ISP, providing us a native bandwidth to be able to support PowerHA. There are tools that are available to you called PDI, Performance Data Investigator, to analyze your performance requirements to do a bandwidth analysis on it. We do it here at IT Solutions Group. I think, Tom, I talked to some of your staff, but you're probably doing it now as well. And then IBM has some consultants up at IBM and the lab services that can do that for you as well. It can use internal or external disk. It does require a PowerHA license. These licenses are very inexpensive. They're about $3,400 per core. So if you take 2 one-core systems with 3 years maintenance on it, SWAM on it, you're talking about $9,000. So the requirements for PowerHA licensing is very inexpensive. There's many flavors to PowerHA. Geographic mirroring is definitely internal disk, but you can use external. It does offer synchronous and asynchronous communications, so we can get geographical distances with asynchronous communications. Of course, we're going to have a little bit of latency there. Or synchronous, if your data is within 30 kilometers, kind of IBM's standard on that, you could go synchronous. But if you want to go further, there's a function there to go asynchronous. GeoMirror is more a data center type environment where the two systems are sitting in the same campus or same data center. And then global mirroring gives us much more distance. So we typically will see a 3-node system. You'll have GeoMirror replicating to a second system within the data center, and then a third link, which would be global mirror for DR. That's a pretty common implementation process. The key to this slide, though, is you see there's a lot of moving parts to it. I've got internal disk, external disk. I've got SAN technologies. You've got asynchronous, GeoMirror, global mirroring. The point being, there's a lot of design points within PowerHA, and so when you set up a PowerHA implementation, it's important to be talking to the right people to set this up. It's like designing a building, right? The better I do the architectural work ahead of time, I'm going to have a long-term standing building. And PowerHA is very critical to take your time and design it properly. Again, I get calls about once a month where PowerHA is not performing, it sucks, it does this, it does that. We come in and do the root cause analysis on it, and it just wasn't designed properly. So it's very important to take the time to design it properly, but your long-term return on that investment will be tremendous. It's priceless because PowerHA runs very, very smooth. So internal disk, this is GeoMirroring. So, there's a lot of clients, believe it or not, that are even under 1 terabyte of disk on the IBM I. And so GeoMirroring might be the right solution for them. And here is that synchronous mode, and we're less than that 30K. Now, the 4 terabytes is really more of a recovery point. Just like with logical replication, if I lose my production machine, I need to reestablish the communication between the two systems, saving libraries, restoring libraries on that. The same thing with PowerHA. If it loses its marbles, as I call it, it has to resync that entire database or that entire IaaS. So if I've got a 4 terabyte IaaS and I'm sitting on an 80 megabit pipe, it's going to take me several days to do that. Okay, so this is some of the things in the design phase that you need to be careful of when you're doing an implementation like this. This is asynchronous, so it's getting us a little bit further distance on it. But again, bandwidth is very crucial here. With GeoMirror, if I start getting a backlog on my synchronization on it, it will actually start slowing down the processor as well because it's waiting for the handshake or the chat to come back and forth. So again, in the design phase, PDI or Performance Data Investigator to analyze your bandwidth is extremely important. Okay, but GeoMirror asynchronous is a very common for the small to medium business, less than 1, maybe 2 terabyte. It's really the way to go. It's easiest to manage. It's the most cost-effective way to go. And then this is MetroMirror. So this is MetroMirror is only external storage. It doesn't allow internal storage at all, and it's synchronous. And therefore, this is more that data center or campus type environment where you're less than 30 kilometers on it. Okay, and that's because it's asynchronous. I got to write to my target database, and they come back and wait for that commit to come back on it. And so that's why distance is very important with that setup. So here we talked about, I talked about many components on it. Here's external disk. And we have here typically DS8000s, but we're starting to see some great benefits, even getting down to the 5000 series, the 5020s on that. Once you get out to the disk or the SAN storage on it, there's a lot of capabilities within the SAN that does the replication and the chattering back and forth, as opposed to the operating system taking care of that. But again, our distance limitations, and again, you need to consider bandwidth. There is a difference in bandwidth between when you're having internal and external disk. So that's something to be aware of as well when you go through the process. Again, why it's so important to have an architect design this when you're going forward with it. Ash, is this over to you?
Yeah, I guess it can be, yeah. So what are the benefits here? I guess one advantage in replicating data using an IASP and PowerHA is that everything lives, within the IASP. So the data is very central, and it's controlled that way. Would you say that's an advantage here? Obviously, less day-to-day management. It takes a little bit of planning, as you said. It's not something you would typically undertake yourself. You'd use some kind of partner. Limited or no audits to run. So there's no data integrity. Everything lives within that IASP. You don't need to be checking, the two nodes. Role swaps a lot more controlled, and I guess more efficient, generally speaking. Obviously, it differs from installation to installation. And probably a big thing here, it's not reliant on Q or Journ. Q or Journ was never really designed for replication, and certain solutions out there are heavily reliant on Q or Journ. So again, that's just something to be aware of. We don't want to bottleneck replication around Q or Journ.
So one of the things that we see is, to my point earlier, customers using a combination of this technology. And this diagram here kind of really sums it up for us, that you have customers that are using, for instance, like our robot HA with PowerHA to replicate from from the production system using local journal, remote journaling to the target system to do their BI over there. Or there are some things that stay in the sys base, because when you do PowerHA, you're splitting up, you're leaving your operating system in the sys base, but there might be some other applications or some other technology that's left over that the admin domain cannot replicate, so they use a tool like a robot HA to replicate data from sysbase to sysbase and then over to BI. Ash or Matt, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've worked with some customers recently, and they've come across a limit in the admin domain. I think it's 45,000 objects, and they had 130,000 objects. I think their main objects were user profiles, actually.
Right.
Everybody that accessed that application via the internet had in effect a user profile on that machine. So again, just another example how you can start to dovetail some of these solutions. It doesn't need to be one solution, not one size fits all, I don't think anymore.
Yep, and that's correct. And there's also some third-party products out there that don't support IaaS, right? And they will absolutely, you cannot put it into an independent auxiliary storage pool. And so some of those you need something like Robot HA to manage them because the admin domain will not handle them. And again, it's all part of that design phase and understanding the customer's environment so that you can put the right solution in place for the customer.
Yeah, you're right. No two environments seem to be the same anymore. Gone are those days.
No.
Fantastic.
No.
Good. So what else are we talking about now? We've moved on from PowerHA. We're talking about live partition mobility. So released in 2008 on Power 6. LPM is a component of PowerVM, or PowerVM Enterprise Edition, and it provides customers with the ability to move workloads from one partition running on one system to another physical system. All of this is seamless, doesn't impact the user community. The process transfers the processor state, the memory, attached virtual devices, and of course connected users. So the source and the target machines must have access to the same network, use SANs, and be fully virtualized. So I tend to look at this tool as a tool for planned hardware outages in the data center, as opposed to a data tool, if that makes sense. So it won't save you from a data failure, but it's a planned outage in effect. So it's neat, typically a data center solution, and you'll often see people mixing that with maybe logical replication. What are the benefits here? Well, live partition mobility is used to avoid outages for planned server maintenance or even for load balancing across multiple servers. A word of note here, we touched on it earlier, is third-party vendor licensing. So your applications have to be licensed to run on all potential serial numbers or servers, even though you can only run your workload on one serial number at any one time. You just need to factor in the purchase of potentially different or additional licenses so that you can potentially run it on A or B. The last thing you want is some disaster, whether it's planned or not, and you have to squirrel around to find temporary license keys. This just adds unnecessary delay in my mind. So, IBM's VM Recovery Manager for HA. This enables failed VMs or LPARs to be restarted on an adjacent server. So this is shared storage topology and typically used in conjunction with LPM, which we've talked about. It requires what's called a KSys controller, which runs AIX, and the KSys is considered the orchestrator in effect, and provides a single point of control and is deployed typically at the backup site. Shared storage is also a prerequisite here. So this is block level replication, enabling you to move VMs from one host to another, and really should be considered as planned with LPM or unplanned hardware outages, again in the data center. So that's VM Recovery Manager for HA. Very similar looking slide here, but VM Recovery Manager for DR, it's a relatively new name for GDR, Geographically Dispersed Resiliency. It's quite a mouthful. And note, in this diagram, this has two replicated or mirrored storage devices. It's based on replication of VMs to a remote location. The disaster recovery server is inactive until the replicated VMs are restarted on it. That's a key point. So if the production system fails, the VMs are restarted on the second system in the cluster. Again, the KSys is key, and it's responsible for the recovery actions if a disaster or potential disaster occurs. And constantly, the KSys constantly monitors the production environment for typically unplanned outages that could affect the production site or even disk subsystems. What have we got next? Flash copy. Flash copy is
awesome.
This an option, Tom?
Yeah, it is absolutely. But you know, is it really high availability? It isn't, because it's a point-in-time backup. What flash copy does do, and we've had a few people asking some questions, so thank you for all the great questions coming in. We'll do our best to answer those before we wrap up today. But so flash copy, what it is you have a production system running, and you're able to basically, in a matter of minutes, take a flash of that system to another partition, basically, that's dormant, and then you can spin that up. You can do your backups over on the flashed partition while the production continues to run. So now what you're really doing is you're eliminating downtime because of backups. And the caveat to this is you do need to have IBM SAN storage to do that. So flash copy is a feature of the SAN storage from IBM. And from our marketplace study, we see about 40% of the marketplace has SAN today. I think hence why we saw that in our earlier polling question. So certainly something that you can do, but it's DR. It's not high availability in my mind.
Yeah, spot on, Tom. And
well, I guess you could argue that because it keeps your system up and running instead of having downtime because of backups, right? So that could be. So back to you for our last polling question.
Yeah, fantastic. So polling question 2. So we're trying to educate you today, tell you what's out there, but where do you struggle with high availability? And we've got a number of options here. So maybe your business or your company doesn't have any or enough expertise to look after your current solution. We see some evidence now of key resources retiring. Maybe your current solution has some poor performance, or you're struggling with role swaps, or the performance of the role swaps is poor. Maybe you have some limitations with your current solution, because I know businesses change over time. Maybe what the requirements of the business 10 years ago are different to what they are now. Maybe you're looking at moving to or adding logical replication. We've seen how you compare logical replication with PowerHA and also with flash copy, actually. Maybe you're looking to, or you're going to be adding some hardware replication, or maybe you're just on a fact-finding mission and looking for some general advice on PowerHA. So I know that some of the vendors out there, because they only sell a logical replication solution, that tends to be where their sphere of knowledge is. And I'm fortunate enough to work within Health Systems alongside Tom, and I know Matt's the same, that we tend to be quite unique. We have fingers in lots of pies, as we say in the UK, and we have knowledge, very broad knowledge across the landscape. And I know that's something that Matt's going to talk on later. It's definitely horses for courses. One solution is not a fit-all type solution.
Okay, Ash, I've launched the results to the audience.
Fantastic. So we have quite a few people on a fact-finding mission today, which I'd expected that, because we labelled this particular webinar as an education piece. That's what it was titled, and hopefully we've given you some of that information today. We've also seen not enough expertise to look at the current solution. And Tom, I know we both of us have done a number of talks recently at various common events around the world about skills depletion. Do you still see that as a big thing?
Oh yes, I think that even more so. I'm out again at IBM Tech U, and I was doing the IBM Marketplace study as a session, and people were concerned about how do I replace my people that are retiring. So that is definitely a concern. But it's not just an IBM I concern either. That's the thing that people have to realize. It's a overall IT problem.
Exactly. Thank you. Right. So, which high availability option is best for me? And I'm going to actually hand this over to Matt. I know all three of us spend a considerable amount of time speaking to customers about various aspects of their environment, not just HA. But Matt, can you talk us through the process that you'd normally follow, maybe when speaking to a customer that's, let's just say they're considering maybe HA for the first time? What's your typical approach?
Yeah. So we don't propose anything to the customer at all until we understand their environment, and most importantly, understand the customer skill set. We don't want to put a complicated, not that anything's complicated anymore, but we don't want to walk away from a project and let it be unsuccessful, right? So we need to understand what we're putting in place and what the people we're working with on it. But that also leads to that whole MSP model as well. Is people are saying, you know what, we need HA. You go ahead and manage that process. Tom hit on another one here as well. Is people coming and going. The biggest challenge we have is people retire and they didn't do the cross training on a specific product because they were cross training on other things, right? And so they got pulled in the bag on that. So we try to understand the environment, and we literally spend about an hour or two with the customers understanding everything before we make a process going forward. Understanding the recovery point objective. I pretty much talked quite a bit about that. Really, where is your recovery point objective? What's the recovery time objectives? Part of the problem with this whole thing is when you talk to a business, you're talking to a CEO or a CFO or whatever, but they don't know the business on it. One of the things that we do is actually get department heads, each department head in, and then we can talk to each department head and understand the impact of that particular part of the business on it, and then we can come up with a census of what is the right solution for the customer as well.
Got you. That's refreshing. It's understanding requirements, isn't it? Really, it's getting to the nitty gritty about what are they trying to achieve, what problem are they trying to resolve.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So, where are we in summary? So we started off today with a quick look at the Health Systems Marketplace survey and saw that around half the respondents have HA solutions. Great, but HA is a concern for more than half of them. We also saw that 71% of respondents rely on IBM to run more than half their core business. Tom then unpicked HA and saw that really to be classed as a highly available application, it needs to be available for 5 nines or 99.999% of the time. So just 5.26 minutes a year. Matt then explained the differences between HA and DR. And remember, recovery point objectives, the maximum targeted period in which data might be lost from an IT service due to an incident, and RTO, recovery time objectives, the targeted duration of time and service level which a business process must be restored after a disaster or after a disruption in order to avoid unacceptable consequences. Let's just put it like that. We then dissected Db2 Mirror for I, logical replication, introduced the various flavors of PowerHA and how well logical replication and PowerHA complement each other and how common that is now. We then took a look at LPM, Live Partition Mobility, VM Recovery Manager for HA and DR, and then Tom discussed flash copy and whether it was a viable alternative for HA. And then Matt kindly shared just now his approach that he uses to help and advise on the best solution, establishing the exact requirements, including finding out what skills are actually on site at that particular customer. So really, before we finish today, a little bit about Health Systems, a little bit about Matt's company. So at a high level, our solutions blend together 3 areas: automate, inform, and secure. The products will make your servers and applications on them more automated, which is everybody's looking for now. And the information on your servers or the information collected in our processes will help you to inform you about events on your systems, but it can also provide you information about your business data if you're on I. In terms of security, we can assess, report, harden, encrypt data, secure data transfers, and more. Typically on your IBM I servers, but across the whole spectrum of platforms these days. We also do an awful lot in business continuity for IBM I within Health Systems. So we've pretty much been involved in this since day one, offering scheduling and monitoring software and backup software under the Robot product line. And in recent years, we've extended this by purchasing the intellectual property for IBM's PowerHA and BRMS. And we have a dedicated team that can examine your current backup strategy or your recovery architecture and assist you with role swapping and testing. So not just Health Systems tools, but other tools as well. And finally, we offer a DR as a service and can help you with the migration of data to any cloud solution. Now I'm going to let Matt talk about ITSG. What do you do, Matt?
Thank you, Ash. So we primarily do high availability and disaster recovery. We realize that there's no one solution that is one size fits all, period. So unfortunately, there's not many business partners that sell and install both types of replication technologies, but we do, so we're unbiased. We actually go through an education process with the customer and educate them on the solutions available to them and let them make an educated decision on what's right for them. We find all too often where people are offering one solution and one solution only, and frankly, they're doing it because they make the most amount of money on that solution, right? In your polling question, I was quite surprised at the amount of people that are doing fact-finding missions on it. And, with that said, if their business partner or whoever they're talking to is offering them one solution, they're not doing them any justice whatsoever because it might not be the right solution for them. Again, we like to educate people on what the availabilities are for them so they can make the right choice. And, we've been doing HA disaster recovery deployments on it's our daily testament to our dedication to our expertise on high availability. We have installs literally around the world, from Aruba to on one side of the world over to Guam on the other side of the world, and pretty much everything in between.
Nice. Thank you for that. So we've overrun slightly, but let's take a few questions. So we've got quite a few in. Somebody's asked, I've heard people talk about option 42. This is an interesting one. When it comes to logical replication and journaling, what is this, please? So can I take this one? So HA journal performance, when installed, it's a licensed program. You can typically use the chjourn command to enable journal for caching. So it's a licensed program. It will speed up things. Matt, is there any downside to having option 2 or purchasing option 2 and having it enabled? Hey, I think you're on mute.
Matt.
I'm sorry, as Janine said, I had mute on. Yeah, you're vulnerable to data being in cache at that point. Okay, so you have to be aware of the vulnerabilities by implementing it.
Got you. And Tom, here's one here for you. Can you explain again why someone would use PowerHA and RobotHA together?
Well, two reasons. One, there's something left over in the sysspace that you want to make sure that it's highly available when you go to do your role swap from one source to the target. And then two, often with BI. With PowerHA, the target set of disks that are hosting the IaaS over in the target, those are basically, you want to call them dormant, they're silent. You can't get at them, they're not active. So you might want to replicate that data real time to another partition somewhere else where you're doing a query, BI, business intelligence, whatever you want to call it.
Got you.
Right, can I add that? Tom,
yes.
With that too, you can actually replicate to a second system. So you could actually be replicating something in the IaaS, right, with RobotHA, sending it to a separate partition. So you have a lot of flexibility when you start using the two technologies together. The limitations are they're endless what you could do with it.
Yeah, and another point you made earlier is you could use PowerHA in the data center and use Metro Mirror basically, and then use logical replication for your DR site that's further away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Ash, there was a good question too earlier about IaaS and limitations with that. I want to make sure we clear that up. You were talking about a limitation of the number of user profiles that you could replicate with admin domain. There's not a limitation to the size of the IaaS other than really the physical capabilities of IBM Power technology to begin with. So we do have customers that have IaaS that are 100 terabytes in size.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And we'll take one more question. We've overrun slightly because
yeah. Yes.
I want to hear the answer to this one, Matt. What is CBU? How would you define CBU?
It's IBM's generous opportunity to purchase a second machine is how I look at it. A capacity backup unit it stands for, and it allows you to marry a serial number to the production machine. You don't have to buy all users. You don't have to buy license program products. You basically get all the hardware at a reduced price. It makes it very affordable to do that. And customers need to be aware of that, because there are some times where I've seen some customers get where they buying 2 machines for high availability, but they're not getting the CBU feature codes on that, which can be a tremendous savings.
Got you. Yeah, great tip. Excellent. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. So, Janine?
Thanks, Ash, and thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar. If we did not get to your question today, and there were a lot of them, so thank you so much, someone will reach out to you via email to get you an answer. I want to thank Ash, Tom, and Matt for sharing their expertise with us, and remind you to watch for a follow-up email. It will contain a link to the recording of today's webinar. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again. Have a great day.